Ranger found a strange hole in the forest. He panicked when he realized where it led. Jack Matthews had been a forest ranger for over a decade. His life revolved around the sprawling wilderness, with its towering trees, the songs of birds, and the quiet whispers of the wind that brushed through the leaves. He knew every path, every bend in the river, and every hidden corner of the dense woods like the back of his hand. The forest was his second home, and Jack had always found peace in its isolation, away from the noise and rush of the outside world. But that morning, as Jack was going about his usual patrol, something unusual caught his eye. It was a slight shift in the landscape, a subtle change that didn't seem to belong. As he walked along one of the forest trails, he noticed a small, strange depression in the earth ahead. At first, it seemed like nothing more than an animal's burrow, or perhaps a tree root that had dislodged from the ground over time. Yet, there was something about it that made Jack pause, something that didn't sit right. He approached the hole carefully, his boots crunching the dry leaves beneath him. As he got closer, he realized it was much deeper than he expected. The earth around it was unnaturally smooth, almost as if it had been dug out deliberately. The edges were perfectly round, and there was no sign of any animals nearby. It wasn't like anything Jack had seen before in all his years working in these woods. The thought that maybe it was a simple animal hole quickly faded as he crouched down to get a closer look. The hole was narrow at the top, but it widened as it went deeper. The ground inside appeared untouched, with no dirt scattered around like it would be if an animal had been digging. The air around it felt strange, colder than it should have been for a spring morning. Jack's breath misted in the cool air as he peered into the darkness below. It was hard to gauge just how deep it went, but there was a faint sense of mystery emanating from the hole, almost like it was calling to him. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to make of it. It wasn't like him to be unsettled by something so ordinary, but there was a gnawing feeling at the back of his mind. It wasn't just the strange, unnatural quality of the hole. It was the way it seemed out of place in the familiar forest. Jack had walked these trails countless times, and he knew the land as well as anyone. This hole, however, seemed like it didn't belong. For a long moment, Jack simply stood there, studying it. His mind raced with possibilities. Could it be the work of a wild animal? Maybe a bear or a large rodent had dug it out, but the hole was too perfect. It seemed almost too deliberate. Jack was no stranger to the ways of nature, and he knew the signs of animal behavior. Nothing about this hole matched what he'd seen before. He slowly knelt down to inspect it more closely, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the shadows, but he couldn't see the bottom. It was too deep, and the light seemed to disappear as if it were being swallowed by the earth. The sound of the forest around him, birds calling, leaves rustling in the wind, seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet hum of something distant, almost imperceptible. It was then that Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. He hadn't noticed it before, but now that he was focused on the hole, he could hear a faint, low hum coming from deep within the earth. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to send a ripple of unease through him. The sound wasn't natural, and it wasn't something he could explain. It seemed to vibrate in the air, like an electrical current passing through the ground. Jack stood up quickly, his heart racing slightly as the unease turned to something more. The sound was getting louder, and the air seemed to thicken, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this hole than just a simple gap in the earth. Something about it felt wrong. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of branches snapping behind him. Jack spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the radio on his belt. His muscles tensed, but when he looked, there was nothing. No animal, no person, just the quiet rustling of leaves in the wind. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. It was probably nothing. The forest had a way of playing tricks on your mind, especially when you were alone in it for hours on end. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The hole continued to draw his attention, the humming noise now almost deafening in his ears. It was as though the forest itself was trying to warn him, but Jack couldn't turn away. There was something compelling about it, something he couldn't explain. He had to know what was down there. After a moment of hesitation, Jack pulled the rope from his pack. He had learned over the years to always be prepared for the unexpected. As a ranger, he was often called to deal with difficult terrain, and this hole seemed like the perfect opportunity to test his skills. He tied the rope securely to a sturdy tree nearby and began to climb down into the hole. His flashlight cut through the darkness, and the further he descended, the more the humming intensified. The air grew colder as he descended deeper into the earth, and the walls of the hole felt damp and slick. Jack's feet hit the soft earth below, but the ground felt different. It was as though the soil beneath him wasn't as familiar as he thought it would be. The air was thick, heavy with an almost tangible energy. Jack could feel it in his bones, the same unsettling feeling he'd gotten when he first spotted the hole from above. But now it was stronger, more urgent. He took another step, his boots sinking slightly into the ground as he moved further into the tunnel. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the hum was so loud now that it felt like it was vibrating in his chest. Jack tried to steady his breath, but the air felt thinner, and every step he took made the sense of dread grow. As Jack continued his descent, he couldn't help but wonder what was waiting for him at the bottom. Was it just an underground cavern? Or had he stumbled upon something far more significant? Maybe a natural wonder, or maybe something man-made. The forest had its secrets, but this felt different. This felt like something he wasn't meant to find. His heart pounded as he reached the bottom of the hole, standing in a small chamber of earth. The humming noise had reached its peak, almost overwhelming in its intensity. Jack shone his flashlight around the chamber, but what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. There were markings on the walls, strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. The air was charged with a subtle energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The symbols on the walls didn't look like anything Jack had ever seen before. They were intricate looping shapes, swirling in patterns that seemed to move when he looked at them for too long. Jack's heart raced. He had no idea what these symbols meant, but he could feel they were important. And the hum had changed. It was no longer just a distant sound, but a part of the very air around him, a pulse that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Standing in that chamber, Jack felt a strange sense of awe and fear. He had discovered something that shouldn't exist, something that might change everything. But as he stared at the symbols, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't supposed to be here, that whatever lay in this hidden chamber was not meant for human eyes. Something ancient, something powerful was waiting in the darkness, and it had been disturbed. Jack's mind raced, his instincts telling him to leave, to get out before it was too late. But it was too late for that. The hole, the symbols, the humming, they were all connected. And Jack was at the center of it all, caught between curiosity and fear, wondering just how much his discovery would cost him. Jack's heart was still pounding from the discovery he had just made. The symbols on the walls glowed softly, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. The hum in the air, which had once felt distant, was now louder and seemed to vibrate through his body. It was as though the very ground beneath him was alive, reacting to his presence. His mind raced, but his feet remained frozen. He couldn't look away from the symbols. They seemed to pull him in, urging him to come closer to understand what they meant. For a long moment, Jack stood in the chamber, unsure of what to do. His flashlight flickered again, as if it too was unsure of what to make of this place. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and every breath Jack took felt heavier than the last. It was like he was standing in a space that was both familiar and completely alien to him. The forest above seemed like a distant memory now. He was no longer just a ranger patrolling the woods. He was someone who had stumbled upon something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. He took a deep breath and slowly approached the closest symbol on the wall. The lines and curves of the pattern were intricate, each curve blending into the next in a way that felt deliberate. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against the cool stone surface. As his skin made contact, a sudden flash of light filled the room, blinding him for a split second. Jack stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. His pulse quickened, and for a moment he was convinced something was about to happen. The humming grew louder, and the air seemed to hum in response to the light. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the light faded, and everything returned to normal. The chamber was silent again, except for the faint hum that now seemed to echo in Jack's ears. His hand trembled as he pulled it back from the wall, his mind racing with possibilities. What had just happened? Was it the symbol that caused it? Or was there something else in the chamber that had reacted to his touch? Jack looked around, his eyes scanning every corner of the chamber. The walls were adorned with more symbols, but they were all too alien for him to understand. He was no linguist, no scholar of ancient cultures. He was just a ranger. But as he stood there, he couldn't help but feel that he was standing at the threshold of something far more significant than a simple discovery. These symbols were not just markings on a wall. They were part of something much bigger, something that had been hidden beneath the earth for who knew how long. The hum in the air grew stronger, and Jack's nerves began to fray. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a growing sense of urgency, as if the chamber itself was trying to tell him something. He could almost hear the walls whispering, the symbols beckoning him to dig deeper, to uncover their meaning. But as the pressure mounted, so did Jack's doubt. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was just a forest ranger, a man who kept the peace in the woods. He wasn't equipped for this kind of mystery. Despite the fear gnawing at his mind, Jack knew he couldn't turn back now. He had already gone too far. The hole, the chamber, the symbols, they were all part of something much bigger, something that could change everything. But what was he supposed to do next? How could he make sense of it all? Jack's thoughts raced, but just as quickly as they came, they seemed to scatter like leaves in the wind. He knew he needed to explore further to understand what this place truly was. He couldn't leave without knowing more, without getting to the bottom of what he had found. He had to find out what the symbols meant, what the humming sound was, and most importantly, what the purpose of this hidden chamber was. The answers were here, buried beneath the earth, and he had to uncover them. With determination settling in his chest, Jack took another step forward, his feet light as he moved deeper into the chamber. He could feel the weight of the air around him pressing down, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the symbols. The more he looked at them, the more they seemed to move, the lines twisting and curling in a hypnotic dance that almost felt intentional. The further Jack stared, the more it seemed as though the symbols were shifting, like they were reacting to his presence, to his gaze. Jack reached out again, this time with more confidence. He ran his fingers over the symbols, tracing their curves and lines. As he did, the humming noise began to change again, deepening in tone, vibrating through his fingertips. The stone beneath his hand seemed to thrum, as if it were alive, responding to his touch. Jack's heart skipped a beat. There was no logical explanation for this. Nothing in his training had prepared him for something like this. Suddenly there was a sharp sound, like a stone grinding against stone. Jack jerked his hand back, his eyes wide as he looked around, but the chamber was still silent. The walls remained unchanged. The humming, however, had stopped. The room felt eerily still, as though whatever had been set into motion had finally settled. Jack took another deep breath, his mind working overtime to process everything that had just happened. He couldn't deny it any longer. He had uncovered something important, something that could have massive implications. But what was it? What had he activated by touching the symbols? And why did the air feel so thick with energy? He couldn't afford to waste time. He had to figure this out before it was too late. He couldn't help but wonder if there were more answers waiting for him deeper within the chamber, if the symbols had a greater significance than he could comprehend. As Jack moved deeper into the room, he noticed something odd. In the far corner, almost hidden in the shadows, there was a stone pedestal. It looked like it had been carved from the same material as the walls, but it was smoother, almost polished. Atop the pedestal rested a dark, obsidian-like object. It was perfectly round, smooth to the touch, with strange markings etched into its surface. Jack's curiosity overtook him once more. He moved toward the pedestal, his hand reaching out to touch the object. The moment his fingers brushed against it, a sudden, intense burst of light filled the chamber once again. This time it wasn't just a flash, it was blinding, bright enough to make Jack's vision blur. He squeezed his eyes shut, feeling a rush of heat wash over him. The humming noise grew deafening, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift, the walls vibrating as though the entire chamber was coming alive. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went still. The light faded, the humming stopped, and Jack opened his eyes. He was standing in the same place, but everything felt different now. The air was heavier, and the symbols on the walls seemed to glow brighter. The pedestal, too, seemed to radiate with a strange energy. Jack's heart raced as he realized what had just happened. The chamber was reacting to him, to his touch. Whatever this place was, it was alive, and it was waiting for something. Jack didn't know what it was waiting for, but he was certain that he had just triggered something powerful. And whatever it wasn't something that could be ignored. Jack stepped back, his breath shallow but his mind clearer than ever. He had to leave this place, he knew that, but he couldn't help feeling a nagging sense of dread. He had uncovered something ancient, something far beyond his understanding. And as he stood there in the heart of that underground chamber, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his discovery was just the beginning. Jack stood in the chamber, the echoes of the strange event still ringing in his mind. His body was tense, and his heart pounded in his chest. Every part of him wanted to run, to get out of that underground space and forget what he had seen. But some deep, undeniable force kept him rooted to the spot. He couldn't look away from the pedestal and the dark obsidian-like object that now seemed to hum with a life of its own. The symbols on the walls flickered softly, casting an eerie glow over the room, and Jack's senses were overwhelmed by a feeling he couldn't name. What had just happened? Why did it feel like the very earth was alive, reacting to his presence? Was this just a series of bizarre coincidences, or had he really stumbled upon something ancient, something that had been hidden for a reason? The thought of leaving, of climbing back up to the surface and putting all of this behind him, was tempting. But there was something in the air, something almost magnetic, that pulled Jack deeper into the mystery. He glanced at the obsidian object again. The way it sat on the pedestal, smooth and unblemished, felt like it was waiting for him to touch it again. But Jack hesitated. He had already triggered something once by touching it, and he didn't know what kind of consequences it might have. The humming in the air had stopped, but there was still an unmistakable energy in the room, a tension that seemed to tighten the very space around him. It felt like something was about to happen, something that Jack wasn't sure he was ready for. Yet, he knew he had to understand. He had to know what this place was, why it was here, and what purpose it served. The urge to find out what lay beneath the surface, to peel back the layers of this mystery, became stronger than his fear. Taking a deep breath, Jack slowly moved toward the pedestal again. The air felt thicker this time, almost like it was resisting him, but Jack pushed through. He reached out his hand, fingers trembling slightly, and brushed the surface of the obsidian object. The moment he touched it, the chamber seemed to shift. The ground beneath him vibrated, not violently, but in a subtle, almost rhythmic way. The symbols on the walls flared up, their light growing brighter as the object in front of him seemed to pulse. For a moment, Jack thought he was going to lose his balance, but he steadied himself. He didn't understand what was happening, but he was too curious now to stop. His eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in energy, but nothing seemed to explain it. The humming had returned, but it was different this time. It wasn't just a vibration in the air. It was as though the sound was coming from within the walls themselves, a low, resonant hum that seemed to speak directly to Jack. He pulled his hand away from the object, and immediately the vibrations stopped. The chamber fell silent again, but Jack felt different. There was a subtle change in the air, as though the space around him had shifted, but it was hard to put into words. He stood there for a long moment, just trying to make sense of everything. What was this place? Who had built it, and why? Was this some kind of ancient temple, or something more, something far more significant? Jack's mind raced with questions, but there was one that stood out above all the others. What was the purpose of the obsidian object? Why did it feel like it held so much power? The room around him seemed to close in, the weight of the silence pressing on him. His instincts told him he needed to leave, to escape before he did something he couldn't undo. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. In the far corner of the room, behind a cluster of large rocks, was another tunnel, barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't large, but it was there, another path hidden away from view. The thought of exploring it filled him with dread, but at the same time he felt an undeniable pull toward it. It was as if the tunnel was calling him, urging him to step forward to see what it led to. Without thinking, Jack found himself moving toward the opening. He didn't know why he felt compelled to explore further, but he knew he couldn't leave until he had uncovered the truth. He crouched low to the ground and crawled through the narrow passage, careful not to disturb anything. The tunnel was tight, but it opened up into another chamber. This one was larger, and as Jack entered, he felt a rush of cold air hit him. It was unlike anything he had experienced before. The air in this room felt different, chilled, almost unnatural. He took a cautious step forward, shining his flashlight around the room. The light revealed a large, stone structure in the center, something that resembled an altar. But unlike the rest of the chamber, which seemed to have been carved with symbols and intricate designs, this structure was smooth, perfectly symmetrical. It looked newer, as though it had been placed there recently. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This was not a natural formation. Someone, or something, had created this. The altar was surrounded by more symbols, and as Jack approached it, he felt the unmistakable sense that he had crossed a threshold. The air seemed to thrum with energy, as though something ancient and powerful was awakening in response to his presence. He reached out to touch the altar, his fingers hovering just above its surface. As soon as his fingers made contact, a sudden jolt of energy surged through him, and he staggered back, almost losing his balance. The room around him seemed to flicker for a moment, the light from his flashlight shimmering as if reality itself was bending. For a split second, Jack thought he saw something, a figure, faint and translucent, standing just beyond the altar. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but the feeling it left behind lingered. Jack's heart raced, and he quickly pulled his hand away from the altar. What had that been? Was it a vision? Or had he truly seen something from another time, another world? The possibilities flooded his mind, but he couldn't allow himself to linger on them. He had to stay focused. Jack took a few steps back from the altar, his mind spinning. He had come so far, but now, more than ever, he felt a sense of urgency. Whatever this place was, it wasn't something that could be ignored. The chamber, the symbols, the altar, everything seemed to be tied together, each piece a part of a greater whole. He needed to understand, to piece it all together before it was too late. But as Jack turned to leave the chamber, a sharp, piercing noise suddenly cut through the air. It was high-pitched, almost mechanical, and it seemed to come from all around him. The noise echoed through the tunnel, reverberating off the walls like an alarm. Jack froze in place, his mind racing. The noise was followed by a low, rumbling sound, like the ground itself was beginning to shake. The vibrations in the chamber grew stronger, and Jack felt the walls tremble beneath his feet. He glanced around, panic rising in his chest. Was the tunnel collapsing, or was something else happening? The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and the humming noise returned, louder than ever. Jack's heart thudded in his chest as the walls seemed to pulse with energy. Something was happening, something he wasn't prepared for. He needed to get out, and fast. But as he turned to leave, the entrance to the tunnel, the path he had just come through, suddenly vanished. The stone walls seemed to shift, closing off the exit as if they were alive, locking him in. The rumbling sound grew louder, and Jack felt a rising sense of dread. There was no escape. He was trapped. And whatever was about to happen, he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't something he could stop. Jack's pulse raced as the walls around him seemed to shift. The ground trembled under his feet, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. His heart pounded in his chest, and the air grew heavy with tension. The path he had just walked through had vanished, sealed off by the shifting stone. Jack took a few steps back, his mind scrambling to process what was happening. He was trapped. The tunnel was gone, and there was no way out. For a moment he just stood there, frozen in place. His breath was shallow, and his hands trembled. He could feel the energy in the air, thick and charged, like a storm was brewing. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, casting a pale, eerie light across the chamber. The humming noise that had been so faint before was now deafening. It was as though the very room was alive, reacting to his presence. Jack's first instinct was to panic, to run and find an escape, but there was nowhere to go. The walls were now completely solid, and the path he had entered through had disappeared. It was as if the chamber had been waiting for him to make this exact move, as if it had planned this moment all along. The rumbling sound deepened, almost as if something massive was shifting beneath the ground. Jack's legs felt like jelly, but he forced himself to stay upright. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. What was this place? What had he triggered? And most importantly, what was about to happen? He couldn't stay here, Jack knew that much. He needed to find a way out before whatever was happening escalated further. He began to move cautiously, his eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of an exit. The stone walls, however, offered no answers. They were smooth and unyielding, with the same strange symbols carved into them. It seemed like the chamber itself was alive, its surface reacting to every movement Jack made. He moved toward the pedestal, the one with the obsidian object. It still sat there, perfectly still, glowing faintly in the dim light. Jack had touched it once before, and it had triggered the strange surge of energy that had filled the chamber. He wondered if touching it again might trigger something else, something that could give him the answers he desperately needed. Without much thought, Jack reached out, his fingers brushing the smooth surface of the object. The moment his hand made contact, the chamber seemed to come alive. The humming grew louder, the walls vibrating with a force Jack could feel in his chest. A wave of heat washed over him, making his skin prickle. It felt like the object had sent a shock through the air, rippling outward like a stone thrown into a pond. For a brief moment, everything stopped. The rumbling, the humming, the vibrations, it all fell silent. Jack stood still, not sure what to expect next. He didn't know if he had made a mistake by touching the object again, but he had no choice now but to wait and see. Then, something unexpected happened. The stone pedestal began to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the pedestal began to rise, the smooth surface of the stone moving as if it were alive. Jack stepped back, his eyes widening in disbelief. The object on top of the pedestal remained still, but the stone structure it sat upon was moving, its shape changing, revealing something hidden underneath. The pedestal rose higher, and with it came a low, groaning sound like the shifting of ancient stone. Jack could feel the temperature in the room rise, the air growing thick and charged. The walls around him seemed to pulse with energy, as if the entire chamber was reacting to the change. Jack took another step back, his breath quickening. He had no idea what he was witnessing, but it was clear that whatever was happening was far beyond anything he could have imagined. As the pedestal reached its highest point, the stone shifted completely, revealing a hidden compartment beneath it. Inside the compartment, Jack could see a faint glow emanating from something that looked like a map. It was covered in strange markings, similar to the symbols on the walls. The map was old, its edges worn and torn, but the light it emitted was undeniable. It wasn't just a glow, it was a pulse, as if the map itself was alive, reacting to Jack's presence. His curiosity overpowered his fear. He stepped closer to the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the map. The markings were unlike anything he had ever seen before. They didn't resemble any known language or symbol. Instead, they looked like a series of interwoven lines, each one forming a complex pattern. It was beautiful in its complexity, but it also filled Jack with a sense of unease. What was this map? Where did it lead? And why had it been hidden in such a secret place? As Jack reached out to touch the map, a sudden jolt of energy shot through the room. The pedestal began to shake violently, and the ground beneath Jack's feet rumbled as if it were about to crack open. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, their light flickering erratically. The air grew thick with pressure, and Jack's breath became shallow. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something immense, something that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for this moment to awaken. He quickly pulled his hand back from the map, his heart pounding in his chest. The rumbling intensified, and the chamber seemed to shift in response. Jack could feel the walls closing in, the air pressing down on him. He knew he had triggered something powerful, but he didn't know what it was or what it meant. All he knew was that it wasn't something he could control. He turned and ran toward the far end of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The rumbling grew louder, and the floor beneath him shook with every step. As he reached the wall, he placed his hands against the smooth stone, desperately searching for some way to escape. But there was no door, no window, nothing. The stone was solid, unyielding. Jack's mind raced. He had to find a way out, but the walls seemed to be closing in on him. The energy in the room was suffocating, and the ground continued to tremble beneath his feet. He felt like he was running out of time, like whatever was happening in this place was reaching its peak. He had to act fast. In a moment of desperation, Jack looked up at the ceiling. It was the only part of the chamber he hadn't yet explored. The symbols on the walls had been glowing, pulsing with energy, but there was nothing on the ceiling. It was just smooth, solid stone. But something told him that the answer was up there, hidden in plain sight. He jumped, his hands reaching for the stone above him. For a moment he felt nothing, just the cold surface of the rock. But then, to his surprise, his fingers found a small crack in the ceiling. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he dug his fingers into the crack, pulling at it with all his strength. The stone began to shift. Slowly, the ceiling above him cracked open, revealing a small passageway. A rush of fresh air hit him, and Jack couldn't believe his luck. He climbed up, pushing his way through the crack, and emerged into a narrow tunnel above the chamber. As he pulled himself through the opening, the rumbling in the chamber stopped. The air grew still once more, but Jack knew he couldn't stay. He had triggered something that was far bigger than he could understand, and he needed to get out before it was too late. With a final glance at the chamber below, Jack turned and ran down the narrow tunnel, knowing that whatever had been awakened, he had just scratched the surface of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Jack scrambled through the narrow tunnel, his breath coming. In sharp, frantic gasps, the walls of the tunnel felt like they were closing in on him, the darkness pressing against him as though the very earth itself was trying to trap him inside. The rumbling from the chamber below had stopped, but the tension in the air was thick, as if something unseen was watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. His heart pounded in his chest, each step echoing in the silence of the tunnel. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that whatever he had awakened in that underground chamber was now stirring, gaining strength. He didn't know what had caused the pedestal to shift, or what the glowing map meant, but he knew one thing for sure. He had disturbed something ancient, something far beyond his understanding. The passage ahead seemed to stretch on forever, but Jack pushed forward. He didn't dare look back. He could still feel the weight of the chamber pressing on his mind, the symbols, the hum, the energy that had filled the air. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly understood. What was this place? What was the purpose of the strange object and the map? And why had it all been hidden away for so long? His thoughts were interrupted as he reached a dead end in the tunnel. He had been so focused on escaping that he hadn't noticed how the walls of the passage had gradually narrowed, closing in tighter with every step. Now, standing before the stone wall, Jack felt his stomach drop. The path ahead was blocked. He could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on him, making the air feel heavier and harder to breathe. Panic surged through him. The tunnel had seemed like the answer, the way out, but now it felt like it was closing in on him, leaving him with no way to escape. He turned around quickly, his eyes scanning the passage behind him, but there was no sign of any other way out. The walls were solid, unyielding. He was trapped. His chest tightened, and for a moment he felt completely helpless. It was as though the entire underground structure was a trap, designed to hold him in place to keep him from leaving. The energy in the air had been building, and now it felt like the walls themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Jack's mind raced. He had to get out. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He reached for the walls, his hands brushing against the cold stone as he searched for any way to break through. His fingers felt along the surface, but there was nothing, no cracks, no hidden doors, just smooth, unbroken rock. It was like the earth itself had swallowed up the tunnel, sealing it off from the outside world. Jack's breath quickened as the weight of the situation settled over him. His heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't let panic take over. He had to think, he had to find a way out. But how? What had caused the tunnel to close off? And why was everything in this place so different from anything he had ever experienced? As he stood there trying to make sense of the situation, he heard something, a soft, barely perceptible sound. It was like a whisper, a low hum, but it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from deeper within the earth, from somewhere below the tunnel. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder, more insistent, as though something was stirring beneath the surface. Jack's eyes widened. The hum was familiar. It was the same sound he had heard in the chamber, the same vibration that had filled the air when he touched the pedestal. It was as if the entire underground system was alive, responding to his presence, to his every movement. His fingers tightened around the cold stone as he tried to make sense of the noise. What was it? What was causing it? And why did it seem to be getting louder? The walls of the tunnel seemed to tremble again, the vibrations growing stronger. Jack felt a strange sensation in the pit of his stomach, a pull as though something was trying to draw him back toward the chamber. He had to resist. He couldn't go back, not now, but the pull was strong and it was getting stronger with every passing second. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had to stay focused. There had to be a way out of this. He wasn't just going to give up, not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. But just as he was about to turn and look for another way out, the walls of the tunnel began to shift again. It was slow at first, like the earth was waking up from a long slumber, but then the change became more pronounced. The stone walls cracked, deep fissures forming along the surface, and the air grew even heavier. The ground beneath Jack's feet trembled, and the faint humming sound grew louder, almost deafening. The passage around him seemed to change shape, the walls warping and twisting like they were alive, reacting to some unseen force. Jack stumbled back, his hands pressed against the wall for balance. He could feel the power building in the earth, a force that he couldn't explain but that he could sense deep within his bones. The vibrations were so intense now that it felt like the ground was going to split open beneath him. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced. What was happening? What was causing this? And then, without warning, the stone walls of the tunnel gave way. They cracked open like a giant wound, and Jack was thrown backward as the ground beneath him gave way. He hit the ground hard, his body skidding across the rough stone, but there was no time to recover. The tunnel was collapsing, and he had to get out. With every ounce of strength he had left, Jack pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the impact. The tunnel was crumbling around him, the walls disintegrating as the earth seemed to shift and break apart. He didn't have time to think. He didn't have time to do anything but run. The way forward had opened up, and he didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted down the newly revealed path, the crumbling tunnel collapsing behind him with a deafening roar. The air was thick with dust, and the ground beneath him seemed to shake with every step. Jack's heart raced as he pushed forward, the faint hum growing louder and louder in his ears, pushing him onward. It was like the entire underground system was alive, and it was leading him somewhere, urging him to follow. Jack's legs burned as he ran, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to. The path ahead was dark, but the sound of the hum guided him, pulling him forward with an unrelenting force. He didn't know where the path would lead, but he knew he couldn't stop now. He was too deep in this mystery, too close to the answers to turn back. The sound of the tunnel collapsing behind him was growing fainter, but the hum in the air was growing stronger, louder, almost like it was coming from the very walls themselves. Jack's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything, but it was all too much. The symbols, the object, the energy in the air, it was like nothing he had ever encountered before. But there was one thing he knew for sure now: this was only the beginning. And whatever was happening, whatever had been awakened in this place, was far from over. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as he ran through the darkened tunnel, his heart pounding in his chest. The hum in the air grew louder, almost overwhelming, vibrating through the very ground beneath his feet. The walls around him seemed to pulse with energy, alive in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. The collapse of the tunnel behind him was a distant rumble now, but the path ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the way forward dark and uncertain. He didn't know where he was going. His mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of what had happened in that chamber. The obsidian object, the symbols, the map, it all felt like part of something much bigger than he could comprehend. Jack had stumbled into something ancient, something that had been hidden away for a reason, and now it seemed like the earth itself was reacting to his presence. Every step he took felt like it was leading him deeper into a mystery he wasn't prepared for. His legs ached from the sprint, but he didn't dare stop. He couldn't slow down now. The walls of the tunnel seemed to narrow, the passage becoming tighter as the darkness pressed in around him. The hum was deafening now, almost like a living thing, vibrating through his bones, pushing him forward. He didn't know if it was the energy from the chamber or something else, but the sensation was overwhelming, and it felt as though he had no choice but to follow the path laid out before him. The tunnel seemed endless. Jack's footsteps echoed loudly in the dark, the sound bouncing off the walls, making it feel like he was surrounded by nothing but an infinite expanse of stone. His breath was shallow, his mind foggy with the exhaustion of running, but his instincts told him to keep going. He had to reach the end. He had to see what awaited him. Then, without warning, the tunnel opened up ahead. The walls, which had seemed so tight and confining, suddenly gave way to a larger space. Jack's eyes widened as he slowed to a stop, taking in the sight before him. The new chamber was vast, unlike anything he had seen so far. It was almost like a cathedral, with towering stone columns rising up to an impossibly high ceiling. The air was thick with a strange, ancient energy that seemed to radiate from every corner of the room. In the center of the chamber stood something massive. It was hard to make out at first, as the dim light from Jack's flashlight only illuminated a small part of the room. But as he stepped closer, he could see it more clearly. A towering stone structure, carved with the same strange symbols he had seen before, loomed before him. It looked like a monument, a relic from a time long past. But what caught Jack's attention the most was the faint glow emanating from within the structure, as if it was alive, pulsing with energy. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The object in the chamber, whatever it was clearly the source of the hum he had been hearing. It was drawing him in, compelling him to approach. He could feel the weight of its power, its presence pressing against him like a force he couldn't escape. For a moment, Jack hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to turn back to escape before he got any deeper into whatever this was. But his curiosity, his need for answers, kept him rooted to the spot. He had already come this far. He couldn't stop now. Slowly, he moved closer to the structure, his footsteps cautious on the cold stone floor. The symbols on the walls seemed to shimmer as he passed them, and the hum in the air grew stronger, vibrating in his chest. It was almost like the chamber was alive, reacting to his presence. As Jack reached the base of the structure, he noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. There, at the center of the monument, was a large, circular indentation, almost like a hole. It was perfectly shaped, as though it had been made for something. His eyes darted around the room, and for a split second he thought he saw something move in the shadows. His pulse quickened, but when he looked again, there was nothing there. Just the monument, silent and still. Jack swallowed hard. He could feel it, the undeniable pull to place something in the indentation. It felt like a natural progression, like he was meant to do this, like everything had led to this exact moment. But what did the hole mean? What was the purpose of the monument? And why had it been hidden away in this underground chamber? His fingers trembled as he reached into his pocket, pulling out the small map he had taken from the pedestal earlier. The map, glowing faintly in his hands, seemed to pulse in time with the hum of the chamber. Jack unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the strange markings. They were similar to the symbols on the walls, but the map seemed to show a path, a route that led directly to the monument. Jack's eyes widened as he realized something. This map, these symbols, the monument, they were all connected. The object on the pedestal, the glowing map, the hum in the air, it was all pointing to this one moment. But what was the purpose? What was he supposed to do? His fingers moved hesitantly toward the indentation in the monument. As his hand hovered over the hole, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the monument itself was alive, reaching out to him, urging him to complete whatever task had been set in motion. It was like a puzzle, a riddle that had been waiting for centuries to be solved, and Jack had the final piece. Without fully understanding why, Jack placed the map into the indentation. The moment his fingers made contact, the entire chamber seemed to come alive. The ground beneath him shook violently, and the hum that had filled the air reached a deafening crescendo. The monument itself began to vibrate, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter, almost blindingly so. Jack stumbled back, his hands reaching out to steady himself as the room seemed to shift around him. The floor trembled beneath his feet as the monument began to move. Slowly, like a great machine coming to life after centuries of dormancy, the stone shifted, opening up like a flower in bloom. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the center of the monument revealed what was inside, a glowing orb pulsing with a brilliant light. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, but it was also terrifying. The orb seemed to radiate power, ancient energy that made the air crackle with tension. Jack felt like he was standing on the edge of something momentous, something that could change everything. As the orb continued to glow brighter, Jack's mind raced. He didn't know what this orb was, what it meant, or why it had been hidden away in this chamber, but he knew one thing: it was powerful. And it was clear that whatever had been awakened in this place was far beyond his understanding. The orb seemed to respond to his presence, its glow shifting as Jack stepped closer. His heart raced in his chest as he reached out, his hand trembling. He had come this far. He couldn't stop now. Whatever this orb was, it held the key to everything, everything that had led him here, everything that had been hidden beneath the earth for centuries. As his fingers brushed against the surface of the orb, the world seemed to shift. The chamber, the walls, the very air itself, it all seemed to blur, distorting around him. Jack's vision wavered as a flash of light enveloped him. For a moment he couldn't see, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, everything stopped. The light faded, the hum in the air ceased. The monument, the orb, the chamber, they were all still. But Jack was no longer sure where he was. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. All he knew was that whatever had happened in this chamber had changed everything. He had awakened something ancient, something powerful, and now he was standing at the edge of a new reality. But what had he unleashed, and what would happen next?